Welcome to Guy Walking and Thinking, and today I'm walking and thinking on a giant vegetable farm on the border of Swaziland. Today I'm thinking about why Christians are arrogant and conceited. Excuse the provocative term, but that's very relevant for today's thinking. I'm referring to a biblical chapter of Romans 25, where Paul addresses the Gentile church, the very newly established Gentile church, on what exactly is God's plan for geopolitical Israel. Now, you've got to understand that in the first century, the Gentiles, who are very new to the church, because the church is entirely consisted by Jews in the beginning, and Paul is one of the initial members of the sect of the Nazarene, the early Christians, to go about recruiting Gentiles. And the Gentiles and the Jews are rightly concerned about, well, what of geopolitical national Israel? The entire Bible is about geopolitical Israel, and the historical sources and the secular sources that look at the various empires, like the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and the Roman Empire, in the Bible and through secular sources, they're very often talked about through the lens of Israel. So Israel is a central, geopolitical Israel is a central theme of the Bible. So what now? Now that the Jews have, by a vast majority, rejected the Messiah, have had a hand in crucifying the Messiah, now the Gentiles are acting up. Rightly so as well, because in the first century, their problem with the Jews wasn't just the theoretical one. They weren't just having Facebook debates. The Jews were actually going around stoning and killing the Christians. In fact, Paul himself was one of the people holding the clothes of some of his elders when they stoned to death St. Stephen, I think. So now Paul's addressing Christians and their current attitude towards geopolitical Israel. And he says this in Romans 25:11. I do not want you to be arrogant. I do not want you to be ignorant, he says, of the mystery, and from this arrogant and conceited. Understand this: Israel has received a hardening of their heart in part until the full number of Gentiles comes in. And in this way, then all Israel will be saved. For a deliverer will come from Zion, and he will take ungodliness away from Jacob. And so this is my covenant with them, when I finally will take away all of their sins. On account of, with regards to the gospel, they are enemies for your sake, but with regards to election, they are loved on account of the patriarchs, for God's gifts and calls are irrevocable. Just as you were once shown mercy when you were disobedient and have come in, and now too Israel has been disobedient, so that they one day too, through you, may receive mercy. So I'll stop right there and let's just get into all of that text and what that means. So he starts off by saying very strong words. You're going to be conceited and arrogant if you don't understand what I'm going to tell you. If you do not understand the mystery of Israel going forward. Next he says that understand that they have received a hardening in part. In other words, they still have a concept of God. They still understand the prophets. They still have the Torah. But there's a hardening of their heart in part because they've rejected the full revelation of God, which is the Messiah presented to them in the first century, and they've vastly rejected him. It says, as far as the gospel is concerned, they are enemies for your sake. So Paul's saying, geez, okay, I get it. As far as the gospel is concerned, our sect of the Nazarene, our belief that Jesus is the Messiah, as far as that is concerned, They are your enemies. They are real enemies. They are violent, vehement oppressors of this new revelation of God. But as far as election concerned, they are still loved on account of the patriarchs. For God's gifts and calls are irrevocable. In other words, although they're an absolute pain in the ass, and although they are vehemently against our movement, it changes nothing about God's prophetic focus on national Israel. And why? Because God's gifts and calls are irrevocable. They are unchangeable. They are not dependent on human behaviors or actions. His promises are not subject to any sovereignty of man. Therefore, geopolitical Israel is eternal. It cannot be rejected entirely by God. And there's many other verses that specifically talk into that idea of how a remnant will always remain. And of course, this is particularly relevant today in 2018 because of the massive geopolitical burden that Israel is today. And a large portion of the church, especially in Cape Town, South Africa, where I live, or any of the closer British or the churches close to the Anglican or Neo-Catholic teachings, they are historically very anti-Semitic. Very. In fact, I think they've killed more Jews than any other group, in my estimation. So you can understand why Jewish or Israeli-focused theology would be unpalatable for them, and therefore you'll find that they either won't teach eschatology at all because they don't know what to make of it. In fact, I think that's pretty much always the case. I don't think in my entire life I've heard a sermon on eschatology from an Anglican church, besides the fact they'll say, well, the Messiah is coming back, and as for the rest, well, it's a metaphor. And does it involve Israel? Or Israel is 1948 return of the Jews to their land? Is that significant? They'll say, no, well, that's just a coincidence. And although all prophecies used to be specific and geopolitical, going forward, we are going to consider everything as a metaphor about the church. And if you think about it, it's pretty ironic that that is the conclusion you come up with, is because Paul specifically says if you do not understand that God's gifts and call to Israel are irrevocable, then you'll become what? Arrogant and conceited. And what does a church that doesn't understand the significance of Israel do? It spiritualizes the prophecies and makes it about itself. So that's very clear to me. Paul, seeing way into the future, understanding the attitude of Christians who are ignorant about Israel, and he gives some of his strongest words towards his Gentile brothers and sisters. So I'll continue to speak about this later, more specifically in prophecies that have not been fulfilled, prophecies that have been recently fulfilled, and how they relate to actual geopolitical events, ones that have we can watch on the news, or ones that have recently happened. For example, obviously the most stunning one that's recently happened is the prophecy about the Jews returning, where the Bible says, "Has anyone seen such a thing? Can a nation be brought forth back in a day? I will bring back the descendants of Abraham who I have scattered to every nation of the earth, and they are persecuted wherever they go. But in the last days of man, I'll bring them back to the land of their forefathers. There they'll prosper once again, and Jerusalem will become a burdensome stone unto the whole world. Oh, how all the nations will rage in vain. All the nations that tried to cut or divide or move her borders, I myself will cut to pieces. In that day, Jerusalem will be a burdensome stone into the whole world." And of course, if you just turn on the news anytime between this century, you would have noticed that that is exactly the geopolitical situation in the Middle East. We have a tribe, a pathetic tribe, if I may say, who were slaves in Egypt, that God chose before the beginning of time to be the prophetic center of his revelation to mankind. And he took them through many trials and through many empires, and when they disobeyed him, he scattered them, and then he took mercy on them and brought them back again, and then they disobeyed him again and he would scatter them. So you got for the Babylonian exile and multiple exiles after that. And of course in 70 AD there was another exile when the Romans came and destroyed the temple in Jerusalem and scattered them throughout the world. And of course they were persecuted. It says they will be persecuted wherever they go. If you are prejudiced against black people or Mexican people, they'll call you a racist. But if you are prejudiced against Jews, they'll call you an anti-Semite. This 0.05% of the world has experienced so much prejudice that they have their own word for hating them. And even in our day, we have all sorts of propaganda today giving us, again, excuses to hate the Jews. And of course, this is entirely in line with prophecy. It says the nations will rage in vain against you. It says that your Jerusalem will become a burdensome stone. I think the United Nations has passed more resolutions against Israel than all other rogue nations combined since 1948, which is crazy because they are the only democratic country in the entire Middle East. The only place an Arab can vote in the Middle East is in Israel. And of course the propaganda will use terminologies like Israel, the apartheid state, which is ridiculous because 20% of Israel is Arab and Israel is only 1% of the Arab land. Yet the other 99% of the Arab land has 0 Jews. So, if you want to talk about an apartheid, it obviously exists outside of Israel, not inside of Israel. And of course, the Palestinians and all the border disputes throughout the decades, the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the Sinai Peninsula was with Egypt, the Golan Heights with Syria, and of course the West Bank with the Jordanian refugees, who call themselves the Palestinians, and then the Gaza refugees. And these are all border disputes. And what does the Bible say? It'll be a burdensome stone. All the nations will try to move your borders, and I myself will cut them to pieces. So I'll be speaking more about that in the next few episodes of Guy Walking and Thinking. I'll get into some more specific prophecies. Until then, I'll see you in the next episode.